And in general, that, like we've been talking about, the idea that everything that's in the Torah is there to teach us a lesson, that this is a model for us in our own journeys. So our next medrash, Bereshit Rabbah. So one of the things that a lot of people point out about this is that the story is very sparse in terms of the details. The book of Bereshit, the first book, it takes up a lot of space talking about Abraham, but this critical starting journey doesn't get a whole lot of time. It could have really, with the, for example, with Noah and the ark, it's very specific. There's measurements. There's, different specifications for different kinds of animals, and it gets very specific. With this, it's very vague. And so that's the commentator's playground, right? When it's vague, we're given the opportunity to fill in the blanks. So according to Bereshit Rabbah, Yahweh said to Abraham, "Go you forth from your land." Rabbi Yitzchak said, "This may be compared to a man who was traveling from place to place when he saw a bira doleket, a castle aglow, lit up on fire. He said, 'Is it possible that this castle lacks a person to look after it?' The owner of the building looked out and said, 'I am the owner of the castle.' Similarly, because Abraham, our father, said, 'Is it possible that this castle has no guide, no one to look after it,' meaning the world, the Holy One, blessed be He, looked out and said to him, 'I am the master of the universe.' Hence, God said to Abraham, 'Lech lecha, go.'" Right? If I'm the master of the universe, you can trust me and you don't need specific instructions. So continuing along in our Parsha, Bereshit, Vela told us Terach. Now this is the line of Terach. Terach was Abraham's father. Terach begot, I'm going to say Abraham for simplicity's sake, even though at that time his name was Abram and it was switched later to Abraham. Terach begot Abraham, Nachor, and Haran. So Nachor and Haran were Abraham's brothers. And Haran begot Lot. So Lot was Abraham's nephew. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach in his native land of Ur of the Chaldeans. Abraham and Nachor took themselves wives, the name of Abram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nachor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran. Right? A little bit problematic. He married his niece. But then again, the options were pretty limited back then. The father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren. She had no children. All right. So crossing the threshold. If you remember, just jump back for a second. So we have discussed the call to action. In this case, there's no refusal of the call. The meeting of the mentor is God. So now we're at the crossing the threshold. Where am I? Here we go. While the following story from Bereshit Rabbah does not speak to Abraham leaving his physical home yet, right? Because generally the crossing the threshold is understood, or at least this is what I was able to glean, is when the hero leaves their ordinary world, or leaves their city, or basically leaves their home. But it can be literally, or it can be metaphorical. So I thought of this story in the Medrash that might meet this category. And again, this is from Bereshit Rabbah. And this story is taught to children, and often people, even in adulthood, think that this story is in the Torah. And it's not. It's in the Medrash. But it's such a vivid story, as you'll see, that people often confuse it and think that it's actually in the text. And Haran died, right? Abraham's brother, Haran died in the presence of his father, Terach. Rabbi Chia, the grandson of Rabbi Ada of Jaffa, said, Terach was a worshiper of idols. Makes sense in the time. One time, he had to travel to a place, and he left Abraham, his son, in charge of his store. When a man would come in to buy idols, Abraham would ask, how old are you? They would reply, 50, 60. Abraham would then respond, woe to him who is 60 years old and worships something made today. The customer would be embarrassed and would leave. Not great for business, but a pretty good argument. A woman entered carrying a dish full of flour. She said to him, this is for you. Offer it before them to the idols. Abraham took a club in his hand and broke all the idols and placed the club in the hands of the biggest idol. When his father returned, he asked, who did all this? Abraham replied, I can't hide it from you. A woman came carrying a dish of flour and told me to offer it before them. I did. And one of them said, I will eat it first. And another said, I will eat it first. The biggest one rose, took a club, and smashed the rest of them. And that's what happened. Terach said, what do you think? You can trick me? They don't have cognition. Here we are. Abraham said, do your ears hear what your mouth is saying? Right? If your God can't even do that, then how powerful is your God? What good is it? All right. Terach took Abraham and passed him off to King Nimrod. So we had Nimrod in last week's parsha. There was a mention of him that he was a strong man. It did, but it doesn't say much else about him. And it's interesting because there's this whole list of genealogy and the table of nations, and it lists everybody else, and it doesn't describe very much about him. But Nimrod gets 3 verses. So the commentators are like, hold on, why does Nimrod get that attention before? He must be a significant player in this story. And so a lot is attributed to Nimrod in the Medrash. Including in this story, he's the bad guy. So Terach, Abraham's father, is upset with Abraham for smashing the idols and basically being rebellious and doubting the prevailing theology or way of thinking. So he takes him to King Nimrod. They said to the king, Terach said to the king, let us worship, I'm sorry, I think it's Abraham. Abraham said, right. So people said to Nimrod, whoever it is, it doesn't tell us who, let us worship the fire. Abraham said to them, rather, let us worship water, for it extinguishes fire. Nimrod agreed. All right, that's a good argument. Let us worship water. Abraham continued, if so, let us worship the clouds which provide water. Okay. Nimrod agreed again. Let us worship the clouds. Abraham continued, if so, let us worship the winds that scatter the clouds. Nimrod agreed. Let us worship the winds. Abraham continued, if so, let us worship humans who are filled with wind. All right, so he's clearly mocking him. Nimrod replied, you're just speaking words. I only worship fire. I will throw you into it, and the God you worship can save you from it. Haran, Abraham's brother, was hidden and was of 2 minds. He's like, all right, how do I handle this one? Saying to himself, if Abraham is victorious, I will say I'm with Abraham. And if Nimrod is victorious, I will say I'm with Nimrod. And this way, I'm safe. When Abraham was through was thrown into the fiery furnace and saved, they asked Haran, "Who are you with?" He replied, "I'm with Abraham." Turns out his calculation wasn't quite right. They took him and threw him into the fire, and his insides burned up. And he died before his father Terah, as it says, and Haran died on the face of, basically while his father was still alive. But the point of this story is that this is the transition. Abraham grows up in a house of idol worship, and he starts questioning it, and then he decides to challenge his father with this story, and obviously his father's upset. And then we have this miracle where instead of him getting punished, he gets thrown into the furnace, which it doesn't go into in this particular medrash here, but it is in other places. And he's not burned. Right? And then Abraham goes through other tests. Right? Sometime afterwards, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, "Abraham," and he answered, "Here I am." And that's talking about the famous Akedah story where God tells him to sacrifice his son, and that whole thing that we talk about every Rosh Hashanah. But the commentators say, actually, there were 10 tests. And this fits in pretty well with this idea in the hero's journey of tests, literally, right? And then also the allies and the enemies. But let's start with the tests. Jewish tradition teaches that Abraham was put through 10 tests. Following are several lists of what the tests might have been. Enemies, Nimrod, at least according to the commentator that we saw before. Allies, Terah. I mean, he did take, his father did take him to the king to be judged, and had, caused him to be thrown into a fire. So, questionable ally there. Lot, his nephew. He's pretty quiet in all of this, but maybe he's an ally. All right. Mishnah Avot. So this is from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers. With the 10 tests, Abraham our father was tested, and he withstood them all, in order to show how great was the love of Abraham our father, peace be upon him. All right, so according to Maimonides, what are the tests? The 10 tests with which Abraham our father was tested are in the words of Scripture. The first is his emigration by his statement, may he, talking about God, be blessed, go forth from your land. Right, so that was a test in itself. Is he going to listen to the command, or is he going to say, you know what, I kind of like my life here. I'm not really interested in going anywhere. All right. The second one is the famine that was found in the land of Canaan, which we also have, I think, in this week's Parsha. Where there's a famine, and then he goes down to Egypt, tried to pass off his wife as his sister, so that if somebody's interested in her, they don't try to kill him, as happens in the story. All right. So the land of Canaan, when he came there, and it was the land of his destiny. Oh, sorry, that's not even it. That's before that. Just getting to this new land, and there's a famine there. The third was the injustice of the Egyptians toward him in taking of Sarah to Pharaoh, taking his wife Sarah to the king. The fourth is his fighting against the 4 kings. This battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. The fifth is his taking of Hagar as a wife after he despaired of giving birth to Sarah. So initially Sarah wasn't able to have children, and she said, "Take my servant so you can at least have a kid, and then she was jealous of the kid. So that put him in an awkward position. The sixth is the circumcision that he was commanded about in the days of his old age. Seventh is the injustice of the king of Gerar toward him, and is also taking Sarah. So this story happens twice to Abraham, where a king tries to take his wife, but the king doesn't know it's his wife. The eighth is the expulsion of Hagar. So when Sarah gets jealous, she says, get rid of this kid and his mother. But it's still his kid. The ninth is the distancing of his son Ishmael, and that is his. May he blessed be anything. It's blessed, saying, let not it be bad in your eyes about your youth. The scripture already testified how this thing was difficult. Yet he observed the commandments. It doesn't say what the 10th one is over here. Oh, here. And the 10th is the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. All right. So that's Maimonides' list. Avot to Rabbi Natan, another commentary. With 10 trials was Abraham our father tried before the Holy One, blessed be he, and in all of them he was found steadfast to it. Twice when ordered to move on, twice in connection with his two sons, once in the occasion of his war with the kings, once at the covenant between the pieces, which is the first covenant that we have, although it's an interesting covenant because usually a covenant is a two-way agreement where somebody says, let's make a deal. I'll give you X, Y, and Z, and you have to give me X, Y, and Z. In this case, it's one way. God basically just says, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to take care of your people and make you into a huge nation, and nations will be blessed by you, and all of that good stuff. And once at the covenant of circumcision. Right, so that's now what was the reason for all of this? So that when Abraham, our father, comes to take his reward, the people of the world shall say, more than all of us, more than anyone, is Abraham worthy of getting his reward. And that's talking about the land of Israel, which was known as Canaan at the time. All right, Medrash Tehillim. I think this is another list. Let me see. Another comment. The verse begins as for God, his way is perfect. Loose to our father Abraham, for the Holy One, blessed be he, upon seeing Abraham follow him, chose Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be thou perfect. The words of the Lord is tried. Thus refers to Abraham, whom the Lord proved in 10 trials as follows. That's it. Once in the furnace of fire, right, when Nimrod threw him into the fire, which God said, I am the Lord that brought thee out of the fire of Chaldeans. And once again, when God said, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, twice with his wife, and again with Sarah with Hagar, again with Sarah with Ishmael, cast out. So this is another one of those lists. Psachim, and some say that in real, Jesus 11 endures, the Gemara elaborated. So here, this is a Talmud talking about Nimrod and the fire. When the evil Nimrod threw our father Abraham into a fiery furnace, Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, I will descend and cool the furnace, and I will thereby save the righteous Abraham from the fiery furnace. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, I am unique in my world, and Abraham is still unique in his world, being the only person who's not worshiping idols. It is fitting for the unique to save the unique. Therefore, God himself went down and saved him. So basically, all of this to say that he went through some pretty serious tests, which fits into the idea of the hero having to kind of prove himself worthy. Forno, Nessus Abraham, God tested him to demonstrate that Abraham's love for God as well as his fear of God was not merely potential but actual. Much as God's goodness is not merely potential but actual, the purpose of man's existence is to emulate the virtues of God, and by means of this test, Abraham had an opportunity to demonstrate this. When God created man, he had set himself the objective of let us make man in our image, i.e., as much like divine being as it is possible for a creature to be. Right? So this is the idea being that we're supposed to be in the image of God, and just like God is not just talk but action, here too he had to prove that he wasn't just talk and saying, "Hey, I believe in one God, and you idol worshippers are a bunch of dummies," but that he can back it up with action when it would really possibly cost him. All right, so the next step in the hero's journey is the approach and ordeal. I think the Akedah fits well as both the approach and ordeal. And the approach and the ordeal is basically the steps that he has to take, and the actual going through it. And with the Akedah, it's a very clearly stated test. It literally says it's a test. And ultimately he passes the test, and the ordeal, and then the reward is the promise of his kin to go into the promised land and become a great nation. And he's able to settle in Canaan, and that pretty much is it. So that's my thought. And just one last little quote here. Judaism begins in not wonder that the world is, but in protest that the world is not as it ought to be. It is in that cry, that sacred discontent, that Abraham's journey begins. Right? And it really is challenging when you start off the Torah and these stories, and there's this sort of whoops, God created the world, and then it didn't go right. Oops, okay, reset. And then you have the original characters, and they're so flawed that they can barely get through the first few pages before they're eating from the tree they're told not to eat from. One guy goes and he kills his brother. And you just have one of these after another, and it's like, what is happening here? And when we think of it not so much as judging God, but as us being here for a purpose, if the world was perfect, then there wouldn't be a whole lot for us to be doing here. But by having a world created flawed and having us created flawed, that creates the challenge and that creates the tests for us in our own hero's journey. So I would love to hear what you guys think about this. And like I said, I didn't read the 1,000 myths that Joseph Campbell talks about when he, kind of breaks it down into these different components. The floor is open.
So, Shelley, I just wanted to say, Tennyson wrote a wonderful poem called Ulysses, picking up from the Odyssey, where Ulysses got home and he won his wife and he threw out the other kings. And then the poem begins 3 years after he got home, and Ulysses is bored, and he wants to continue his journey. He says, perhaps some work of noble note may yet be done by men who strove with gods. And I think that's very human, and in a way, it's a story of the Bible. It doesn't stop. People can't just sit and rest. They have to go on. Yeah,
I agree. I think that the hero's journey is on a personal level keeps going. at least if we're living and if we're engaging, that means we want to grow.
Well, I was struck, and this is not really that germane. I never knew about him throwing Abraham in the fire and his brother. And it struck me about the similarity with Aaron's two sons, except Abraham's out of the four of them. Abraham's the only one that came out. Does anybody know of other instances where people were thrown in the fire? Although this could just go back to old idol worship and sacrificing virgins and by throwing them in the fire.
Yeah, don't jump on me. I saw that.
Nothing's coming to mind off the top of my head. Certainly the simple, I mean, at least the way it's presented, it wasn't so much idol worship as it was punishment. It was, kind of the challenge. And just say, you think your God is so great. Let's see him save you from this one.
Right. No, that's definitely, I didn't mean to equate the two, that idol worship, but it just struck me of the use of fire. Right. And that maybe it just goes back to such antiquity where that was the only thing they had to really kill somebody except bludgeoning them, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, but you certainly have the kind of the sons of Aaron trying to one up, similar to Noah's kids, right? Where they're, in that case they were trying to one up each other. In this case, they were trying to arguably one up their father.
Right.
I think that there's also an analogy to the burning bush, which burns but is not consumed. So there's something divine about a fire that doesn't actually burn up and destroy something. And this shows the presence of God. It's just another one of these analogies that came also with the burning bush.
Very good point. Yeah,
that's good. It's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
And, this really wasn't part of secular education, to go back to your original comment.
Yeah.
The Midrash, I really didn't get much Midrash in Hebrew school. It was more learning the basic, the basics, reading, writing, the holidays, so this was particularly interesting.
And that's the unfortunate part about, Hebrew school, is that there's only so much that you can pack into, that amount of time, even when it was, 3 days a week.
Well, when I went, it was Monday through Thursday and then junior congregation Saturday morning.
Got it. And even then they pack it in.
Yeah. Then, right.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I'm missing with not having services on Shabbos morning, is not really doing Torah study like we did when we were in shul. I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, and that was my main motivation for creating this class, was exactly that.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Very good. I think some people are helping to dismantle the sukkah, which might be why not all that many people are on. Oh, wonderful.
Excellent.
I was just saying, I think that's where some people were. Well,
they were too tired after. That's what it was. And I want to welcome my friend Elliot, the photographer from Manhattan, who joined us today as well.
Hi, Elliot.
I don't know if he's on mute. Yeah.
Nope.
It's good to see Marcia and the Goldsteins. And I think we'll wrap it up there. I didn't record it. I don't know if you did, Dan. I don't see record, so I'll try to remember. Oh, you did? Okay, very good. All right, guys. So I will see you tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow at 7:30. And for those that missed it, we're going to